Jose Martinez. There must be more to Jose Martinez than just the name Jose Martinez.
I know, although there are many Jose Martinez in Mexico.
Yes, indeed, they are. Okay, now you've already told us where you are, or at least where you're from Mexico. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Where do you come from originally? Where are you now, if it's not the same place? And what is your so-called cultural frame of reference? And with that, I mean, have you spent time in other cities, locations, rather, or countries than your home country?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I actually was born here in Mexico City. Right now, I live in the state of Mexico, in Metepec City, very close to Mexico City, where's my office right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my cultural reference is basically, I had the opportunity to live in 3 countries. One was Canada. I got a scholarship from Canadian government to learn about doing business with Canada and the APEC countries. So I was able to learn, all the context for doing business legally and socially and culturally in Canada and the APEC countries. So my teammates were from, Sri Lanka, Colombia, from China and other countries. And then I came back to Mexico and I was able to work at Disney World in Florida. So I lived in Florida for some time while working at the park at Epcot Center. And there I also was able to take, a course they have on intercultural and cross-cultural cultures, learning about, Disney is designed, so there's like pavilions of countries. So there's Italy, France, Germany, there's Morocco, Mexico, Japan, China. And I was able to learn about all their different customs and the different, social interactions and businesses through this course there while I was working at the park actually and working with them. And then I was able to live in the UK because I got a scholarship from the WPO, which is the World Packaging Organization, when I was director for the Mexican Packaging Association. And I learned, I made a diploma there on packaging. So I was able to live the experience to work, to live in the UK. So basically that's my framework. It actually helped me a lot because 80% of my working time has been with international companies, US and UK companies. So I'm very much more into those cultural and type of business setting and mindsets.
Yes.
Which is a little bit weird because I'm in Mexico and I have to, combine both.
Yeah.
So sometimes I even being Mexican, I get surprised about some things that we do. But in the same time, I'm Mexican, so I do those things for others, for other countries. So, so it's a nice combination. And what I've been working on the event industry for more than 20 years, so I have been able to visit more than 25 countries, and so far more than 25 cities outside of Mexico.
All right. Well, that's cool. Can I do one step back in turn and one question about your time at Disneyland in Florida? Is the cultural courses that you received there, was that an initiative from Disney itself, or is that something that was your initiative?
No, it's part of the program I went. So you were able just to go and work at the park, but there was also like this special program they had for some students, because we were all students. We were still studying in our native countries.
Yes.
And you could be able to get into this program and you could learn about all these different cultures. So it was a program made and designed by Disney.
How long was that program?
8 months.
Wow. That's quite significant indeed. And then, okay, jumping forward to something you just recently said this is something I got from your bio, which will be in the show notes on culturematters.com under podcast. How do you combine events management, as you said, and then international negotiations? Because they seem to be something totally different.
But actually it's not, Chris, because whenever you're talking about trade shows and conventions and all that, we basically talk about doing businesses, and these businesses are not just locally. We in trade shows, we tend to have international pavilions, and we basically travel around the world to see the same type of trade show, but in other countries. I used to work for Reed Exhibition, which is a very large UK-based trade show exhibition company, and
Yes.
Informa Market, which is the largest one. So we had to travel to Dubai or to Brazil or to wherever to see the same trade show industry, like automotive or hardware or fashion or whatever, in other countries. And so I am very used to having all this interchange while doing events, and also I had the responsibility to have Chinese pavilions, Indian pavilions, and all sort of internationals coming to our show, and I was the one taking care of them. Or for instance, when I did shows in the US, I was able to work in the international area where we greeted all the visitors coming from other countries and show them around and let them know what they were able to do during their stay in our show or event.
Okay, just for my understanding and hopefully also for the understanding of the audience, you used the word pavilion. Can you describe what a pavilion is within your context?
Sure, absolutely. A pavilion is where around 20 to 35 to actually could be 100 of companies come to Mexico or the States, and they build a whole area where they showcase their products. So we're talking about trade shows or international fairs where we have, for instance, the packaging show in Chicago.
Yes.
So we had a whole pavilion, 100 Chinese companies coming with their products to show them to the international market. So what we did is basically host them and help them, show their products. And then we will have an Indian pavilion, and then we will have a German pavilion, an Italian pavilion. And I was,
and it would be then it will talk about a certain theme. So you have a theme, say packaging, or you have a theme, say publishing, or I don't know what, aerodynamics, I don't know, something. And then different countries would then show off, okay, this is what we have, this is what we have, and then visitors can then, well, either educate themselves, and I guess business and negotiations will be done then and there potentially.
Right. The idea is to put together people who wants to buy products and people who offers products. They could be local products or could be, coming from other countries. And that's where the pavilions came into place, because then people will be able to connect with people from Italy or Germany or, the Netherlands or whatever.
Yeah. Now you say, and this is something that I also got from your bio, you have you did some studies in Canada. You worked in the US in different contexts, if you want. And then you went to the UK. Basically, these are all Anglo-Saxon countries in terms of clustering countries together. You cannot explain a culture cluster. A culture cluster are countries that are comparable. They're not the same, but they're comparable. Take Canada and the US. Are they the same? No, they're not the same. Never say to a Canadian that he looks like an American, because they will not like that.
Right.
Vice versa might work, actually. Because I've seen a few Americans that actually say, where are you from? I'm from Canada, and they show an American passport. So we're talking here about 3 Anglo-Saxon countries. So that is a potential cluster. You could add Australia and New Zealand to that, for instance. There are Anglo-Saxon. It's not because they share the same language, but it's just same culture or same, attitude, mentality. In your experience, say Canada, the US, and the UK, your own experience, where do you see the differences between these 3 countries, culturally, of course?
I absolutely see a lot of differences. Canadians tend to be quite more formal, quite less. The US is much more about the individualistic company. Individualism is really strong, and everyone, goes for the star of the moment. Versus Canada tends to be a little less individualistic, though it is.
Yes. It
But
is more so than Mexico, but it's a little bit less than the US. That's what you're saying.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And actually in the US, everything is less spectacular, big, amazing,
Awesome.
great, fantastic, right? And
Yeah.
in the UK or Canada, you're just saying it's good. That's it. It's nice. But
Yeah.
in the US, they tend to use the superlatives to show their the way they express themselves about something, and it has to be more like a showbiz type of thing.
Right.
So I would say that there's a lot of differences between Canadians and Americans. Canadians tends to be, they tend to, there are different cultures, because
Yeah.
I used to have a lot of Chinese and Indian colleagues, or students were there from these countries, but they tend to blend a little bit in the society. They try to build a society even though they are different. But in the US, you kind of live there, but you still live in your culture. Like if you're Mexican, you get along with Mexicans. If you're Salvadorian, you live with the Salvador people. So if you're Chinese, there's the circle, the network you live in is still there, and you go out and live, but then come back to your network.
Right.
Versus in Canada, where people tend to blend a little bit and try to build a society. That's my impression from living there. And in the UK, I think it's also very different. There's a lot of traditions. There's a lot of culture that has come from many years before. So there's still a strong likeness for anything that has to do with the local culture and with the local traditions. So it's not as as open as Canada, for instance, where everything is new and we're trying to build a country, versus UK. We are a country with our own identity, even though we have some kind of disagreements between us. We're still, under the Queen, now the King. So yeah, there's a lot of, for me, there's a lot of differences, even though they are in the same framework. But they do tend to have their particularities, and even for a Mexican, like we actually know that Mexico tends to be very different in terms of, let's say, power distance. We're very hierarchical. We just do what the boss says, because that's the way to do it, especially in the government. So when you go to these places, you really find there's a lot of differences between you and these countries.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like flipping a leaf. If you cross the border between the US and Mexico, culturally, there's really not any of the dimensions of Hofstede that I use, which are, and just quickly call them, hierarchy, individualism. I'll call the third one goal orientation, because you avoid the gender discussion, and the fourth one is predictability. Which can also be called uncertainty avoidance, and none of these dimensions match these two countries, say Mexico and the United States / Canada. When we talk about these clusters, you also mentioned Mexico and LATAM, and LATAM then stands for Latin America, I guess. Is there? I know there are differences. There are differences in Latin America, not South America, but including Mexico, Central America, and then South America. Why do you exclude Mexico from LATAM in this case?
No, it's just to clarify that Mexico is like where I live and I work and I'm located. But then just to add that, well, I basically know, or I've been to all the Latin countries, and I'm able to, negotiate with them and have friends there, and there's a network there. Latins, we tend to be very, network oriented, or very, we trust. Our trust is built on relationships more
Yes.
than in, you know, if you comply with something like in Germany or I guess in the Netherlands, if you do what you were supposed to do, you build trust. Versus in Latin and Mexico, you know, if you have a relationship with somebody and somebody recommends you, then
Yeah.
that's the way to do the business.
Yes.
It's not so much on how you deliver, but how you are connected.
Yeah, it's I think it's collectivism in a way. I mean, it falls under the umbrella of collectivism relatively more so than
Correct.
individualism, which you see in Western Europe and North America. So you and there's another. I am maybe we're crisscrossing a little bit on the topics that you're talking about, but I also read something that you focus on positive psychology. It raises the question, what is that? And then the other one, is there also negative psychology? Or can you frame that a bit for us?
Yes, well, actually, positive psychology is very new.
Uh-huh.
What we actually know as psychology is just the way that after the war, the doctors and people who were in charge of helping people coming out of these mental illnesses,
Yeah.
where, you know, was the development of psychology. Traditional psychology is just, you know, trying to help somebody to get away from or to be healed from mental illness, versus positive psychology, which is just, you know, we don't assume that you are sick or that you have an illness.
Mm-hmm.
We just know that you're a person and you want to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we give you tools for you to flourish. And we don't want to cure you. We don't want to take you away from an illness. You
Okay.
may have one, but what we give you is just the tools for you to be a better person, just to get, you know, and this helps you to be more healthy in terms of your, you know, thinking and everything you do.
Okay. I mean,
Socially.
it sounds very obvious in this way. Is this something that you're actively involved in? And are there cultures that are how do you say that? Either more accepting or are better at this?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely there are, because it has to do with the way that the country allows its population to flourish, to do. Usually we use the PERMA method, which is from, you know, which allows you to have healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. So when you have collectivistic country, you have this because you have extended family, like in Mexico.
Yes. Yeah.
You have extended family. Your business partners are not your business partners, but also your friends. Okay. And
Yeah.
you have personal recommendations, which makes it very strong.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps, for instance. Then you have objectives. If you set yourself objectives, then your mind is set to do something that will allow this mind to be more healthy. And
Right.
then there are some cultures that are more objective focused, like, for instance, the Netherlands. You know, you like to have objectives that go directly to them. So depending on the different factors that we use to help to push these, you know, like tools for you to be a better person, you will flourish more in certain sectors depending on the culture you are in. And you know that there are these, you know, for instance, the indulgence in terms of culture. Some cultures will make you feel like you are tied in traditions and you cannot do many things, versus other cultures like Mexicans. We are very, very indulgent. So we tend to, you know, do what we want to do. And that also adds to the feeling of happiness. And Mexico also scores high in terms of happiness around the world, versus other countries which are more, you know, close to traditions and you are not allowed to express or to do what you want. So yes, it correlates.
Okay. Understand. Okay, makes sense, and thank you for the good examples. That's another one, and you have interesting topics, because in terms of interesting topics, because I think you talk about fair service, right? And fair in one country is totally unfair in another country. I mean, I have this story about, what was it, Nike, the shoemaker, or the sports apparel company,
Yes.
and that's an American company, and they have a so-called no gift policy. In other words, you cannot give gifts and you cannot take gifts either. And most, well, not most, but a lot of that stuff is made in Turkey. Now, I was doing a workshop not so long ago for Nike, and so we talked about this, and this guy from Turkey, he looked at me, he said, listen, if I don't give gifts and if I don't receive gifts, nothing comes off the conveyor belt. And that is not seen unfair. That is simply seen as and he literally used the word greasing the wheels. So how do you differentiate what's fair for you as a Mexican? For me, will look like bribery as a Dutchman, for instance.
Yeah, it's funny, Chris, because Mexico has been, having a process of sophistication in terms of negotiations. I believe that most of the countries, or some countries, think that we are not so sophisticated in terms of how we negotiate. But let me tell you that we have been passing a decade of having to negotiate very sophisticated things with the US, who is our most large partner. And that means, Americans, how they tend to negotiate, how they prepare themselves, not only them, but our main, business partners as Mexico, And this has forced us to understand the differences and to be more, to adequate ourselves to, for instance, the US or the UK, where you cannot give any kind of presents.
Yeah.
I would say that in our culture, it's totally fine and it's good, but we have learned that in high corporations, in large corporations, international corporations, that is something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
So we are learning to be more Americanized in terms of business deals. And I see the Americans also trying to be more Mexican in terms, when they deal with us, they like to now this social part of it. Like the United States used to come and I want business. This is what we're gonna do.
Do it now, and this is that, and chick square.
Yeah, and I don't care about your family or your daughter or your wife or anything. I don't care. I mean, are we gonna make money? Yes. Okay, fine. Let's do the deal, and that's it.
Yeah.
And now they come and they see that we want them to go to a dinner, or we invite them to our house.
Yeah.
And then we talk about their children, and now they are liking that part. They are starting to understand that if they want to do business in Mexico, anyone from outside, it's like the Chinese Wanshi. The relationship is really important.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that, you don't have the business. You may have a one shot and you can do business in Mexico, one shot, that's gonna be it, but I'm not gonna like you and you're gonna be done.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna recommend you to anyone in my network. So now they know that. And we as Mexicans, even though we're very flexible with the time, like the ahorita is, you never know.
Ahorita, podría ser mañana.
Yeah, it could be mañana, could be in an hour, could be half an hour, you never know. So, but now we know that in business, the ahorita doesn't work very well. So we're now more focused on deadlines and on really, really going, to the point, or complying with time frames.
Right.
So that's a combination. So Mexicans, we are getting more sophisticated in terms of how we do the deals. And of course, we have a lot of, not only with the US, but we are very open to have commercial interchange with, it's around 54 countries right now. So we can deal with that. Yeah. I don't think Mexico has taken advantage of that, because we still have a big reliance on the US economy.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, there's going to be the opportunity to open more to other markets.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's interesting stuff, and you describe you describe nicely in different words what I tell my clients as well. When you don't understand gift giving in another country, don't even try, don't start. And typically, when you're coming from an individualistic country like Western Europe, say the Netherlands, the UK, France, Germany, etc., and you go and want to do business with say Mexican, you don't start the business. The Mexican will start to talk about business when they're ready. And so you just do whatever, you go with the flow, and you go with the beer, and you go with the tequila, and whatever is necessary, and a taco here. And they're all the stereotypes, which are sometimes true and sometimes not true. But you describe it in a very nice and interesting way. I have two more questions, if you don't mind. I'm looking at the time that we're here, because I'd like to keep these recordings more or less about half an hour. So the two more questions are: can you give us, please, 3 more tips to become culturally aware or culturally competent, if you want?
Sure, absolutely. Number one is something that has been, discussed in your podcast before, and it's the language. Language is a stronger connection, makes a stronger connection. Even if you're not so, so perfect on speaking the language, it will help you a lot. I remember a time when I was in Canada and I was traveling. I used to live in Vancouver, so I traveled to Montreal and I rented a car and I made a wrong turn. And the police stopped me, and I started to talk in English and explaining, I'm from Mexico. I don't really, know the signs. And then for some reason, I heard his French accent, and I speak French. And so I started speaking French, and he totally changed.
Yes.
He was like more friendly, and he was like, oh, don't worry, just go Mexican, whatever. But the fact that I switched to French was instantly, he was so friendly to me that I was amazed. It was just, he opened the door. Absolutely. And I've learned that because I speak French, Italian, Portuguese, of course, Spanish. I can read German, and I can also speak a little bit of Mandarin. And I know that every time I approach somebody from that country or that, that speaks that languages, if I start speaking to them in their language, they will be very friendly and help you. So it's, for me, languages open doors. So that will be first advice. Second will be to get really immersed on the local culture. That means food, because food talks about identity. When you know what they eat, you know their identity. Also, to get immersed on music, because then you will learn their thoughts and ideas. They are reflected on the words of a song. And art, local art, also tells you a lot about the concept of life of those people. So if you read between the lines, like what they eat, how the art and the music, then you understand how they think in a more holistic way. So it's get immersed. I remember, and this is not something that I complain, but I can share with you. Whenever we have Indian or Chinese pavilions in Mexico, they will not eat Mexican food. Never. You have to do a catering for them with their ingredients. They don't eat tacos at all. They eat their own food, and you have to bring someone, a chef, that will make them their own food. So they never try to, experience the tacos or whatever in Mexico. So I advise you to try to do it because it's part of the identity of where you are located. So get immersed on the local culture. And the third one will be my favorite word when you're dealing with international relationships and cross-cultural matters is flexibility.
Okay.
You have to be flexible at a certain point. You have to understand that there's another person there, that you have to adapt to the context, and that flexibility is the key word for you to be successful. If you give a little bit, the other person will understand, and we'll give a little bit, and then we both can get to a certain objective, to a certain point. If you're not flexible, you're gonna totally,
Yeah,
in
digging your
trouble.
heels and you won't get anywhere. I mean, it's
Right.
positional bargaining, and that doesn't really work. At least that's what I think. Jose, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Last question, if I may, is if people would like to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Well, actually, it's I will give you my LinkedIn. LinkedIn
Okay.
is Jose Martinez Juarez. Jose Martinez Juarez is the LinkedIn Jose Martinez Juarez, and also with my through my website, which is MexicoTradeFairs.com.
Mexico Trade
MexicoTradeFairsServices.com.
Trade Fairs and then services.
Services.
Okay.
Trade fair and singular services.
Okay.
Plural.com.
Okay, that'll be in the show notes when this becomes live, so people can trace that back if they haven't clearly understood or clearly heard what you said. Can I thank you again and close this recording of this podcast by pretty much thinking that we'll bump into each other in the future. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
You're welcome.